Welcome everybody to the FFTCG Show, the new show from the City of Post, where we talk a little bit about the news that's going on, and sometimes we're even going to have some guests on. So this week we're talking all about the new L3 format that was just announced, and we're going to go over what it is. We'll have an interview with one of my buddies talking about how we feel about the format, and then we're going to take a look at a recent tournament that actually used the format. So welcome and enjoy. Alright, so what is this L3 format that we've all been hearing about? L3 stands for Last 3 Opus. So it's going to be the last 3 sets that are legal for this format, and that means that right now it's Opus 8, 9, and 10, and then as soon as Opus 11 drops, then Opus 8 will bounce out and it will be Opus 9, 10, 11. So the set rotates one in, one out every single time a set drops, and that's pretty significant. Now, this is being used at official tournaments, and that means that it's going to be subject to the 2 weeks before it becomes legal, but it's a really fast-paced rotation type format. So you can see this all on the official Final Fantasy trading card game site, but if you want to go into more detail, you can check it out. So L3 is a format that's kind of accessible to everybody. It's going to be a bridge to ease in new players, and it's also going to just have a smaller card pool, so in general it's going to be easy for people to collect the cards and to build decks, and there'll be less pressure to catch up and find those Opus 1 Shantotos, those Opus 5 Y'shtolas, and that Opus or 1 Final Fantasy 10 starter deck, so you can get your YRP going on. Just having this ever-changing format is going to be really exciting, because we're just going to completely build new decks every 4 months when a new set drops, and I think that's going to be really exciting. So L3 is going to be accessible to you at your local store if you choose to play it there. It's going to be great if you want to, if you travel to any of the Opens in North America this year, they're going to be playing L3, and the top 4 of those tournaments will go to Nationals. And if you go to the Grand Opens in Europe, then they're actually going to have a entire second day tournament of L3, and there's a kind of a L3 championship, I think, at the end of that. So it's pretty nice. Alright, next up is our interview with Yuta, one of my local buddies from Vancouver, BC, Canada, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the L3 format coming up next. Alright, so we're back with Yuta, who is one of my local Vancouver buddies. So we're going to talk a little bit about the L3 format that we just introduced. So first off, Yuta, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. I'm excited to talk about this format with you, because I know that you've got some pretty hot takes about it.
Yeah, it's a thing. It's good and it's bad.
Yeah, and you know what, though? I think that that's important, is to recognize both sides of it. So before we get into the meat of this segment, I'm just going to mention that Yuta is kind of our local guy in Vancouver that runs the scene. He recruits the new players. He recruited me, for instance, and he's kind of the main guy at our scene. So, super important guy. We have to take him seriously.
Hopefully. Yeah, I work at the local game store, so it's the only one that hosts Final Fantasy in Vancouver. So, yeah.
Well, that's not a coincidence. I mean, there were other stores, and we're the one that's left. So, okay. So, getting into the L3 format, let's just quickly mention. Let's just go over what are our overall thoughts on the format. So you can take the lead here.
Overall thoughts. I believe it's a healthy direction for them to go, with having a format that has rotation. But personally, I feel like the way they're doing it is not correct.
Yeah, that's fair. So like one of the most common things that we saw online when they announced this was too little sets. Like there's not enough sets involved. So what's the number of sets that would make you be more psyched about this format?
If they were, if they want to continue with a one set in, one set out, I'd say 6 to 5 sets would be good. Um, that way, when you design cards, it doesn't have to be the next set after to complement it. You can wait a bit, and then if it's not going to be a one set in, one set out, kind of like a model of other games, you could do 8 sets in, and then when the ninth set is released, you rotate more than just one set out. And if you do that model, it could go to like 5 to 8, and then back to 5. So 3 sets in, 3 sets out.
So that's kind of like what Magic does, right?
Correct. Yes. And doing it that way, you have sets stay in for 2 years. Granted, Magic has a new release every 3 months, while Final Fantasy is every 4 months. So if the numbers have to be played around a bit, but I feel like that would be a lot better. You don't have too much backlash from the community where their favorite deck or something is completely ruined just because most of their cards are from one set and it's gone.
Yeah, so let's look at an example of that. In Opus 9, we got a bunch of Sky Pirate support, and then Opus 10, we got even more. We got like an insane amount of Sky Pirate support. So when Opus 12 comes out, then 9 will be gone, and you'll lose a chunk of you'll lose a Searcher, Balthier Van, and Fran cards that are all like decent for the archetype, and it kind of just like cuts it off. The Sky Pirate tribal is not even going to stick around in L3 for very long at all.
Yeah, that's the thing. So with only having 3 sets and having to print cards corresponding to what's going on, like, you don't have to have this archetype or whatever to continue seeing play all the time. So that's the reason why you want a rotation. But not being able to always play what you want to play kind of sucks.
Yeah, I think so. I think there has to be a sweet spot where we get to enjoy cards for a certain amount of time, and then they're not staying around too long. Like maybe YRP would be your example of something that will never leave if we don't ban or rotate it.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so besides the kind of the issue with how little sets are involved, are there any other issues that you might have? Like, is this a good thing for players, for like in terms of expenditure? Is it good for stores, bad for stores? What do you think about that?
I believe it's really good for new players. For experienced players or players that have been playing for a while, it's a hit or miss because they already have an extensive collection, and playing what our regular constructed format, which is now called standard, playing that now is fine, unless you're sick of playing against like Wind Water. Then sure, go to L3, play something different. But for new players, they only have to attain like anything, like the first 3 sets, right? Which is really good. And then that goes into helping out stores and also like the secondary market where players sell and trade cards to each other and whatnot, or sell and trade with stores where they only have to get the first 3 sets. So it's safe for stores to always restock because they know the product's going to move. It's not like, they buy like cases and cases of the latest set and only half of their community like pre-orders or something, right? So at least there's that.
Yeah, and I think that's great for new players in that the common and rares in this game are really cheap and they're so easy to get. Like if you buy a box of product, you almost have a play set of commons and rares for that set that you bought. So the tough part is going to be getting those heroes and, well, really just legends. If you're playing only L3, then you might be spending a lot more money on singles for legends, whereas in standard you're actually not, like, a lot of the new legends don't even make it into standard decks all the time, and even if you don't have them, you can play other cards, but you're really going to need those legends in L3. You're going to need to be up to date on those sets, and it's definitely going to mean more single buying or more trading.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be heavy on the wallet. It's another reason why a lot of people in other games try to stay away from a rotating format or disagree having a rotating format because they have to always, I guess, spend money. But the good thing is, I feel like it's a really healthy move. Just needs to be done correctly. And with it having players always having to buy new cards with a smaller card pool, yes, they're going to have to play mainly legendaries and heroics just because the card pool is so small and legendary heroics have a boost in power. They're going to feel stronger, and a smaller card pool, you'll want to play really strong cards. But since it's a smaller card pool, the meta will be figured out a lot sooner.
Yeah, and speaking of which, what kind of decks do you think are going to see a lot of play and so these are decks that maybe we think are going to be dominant, or just maybe they're not actually even going to be the final L3 decks we're going to see this meta, but just like, what do you think people are going to go to right away?
I feel like people are going to go to, so what we currently have, Opus 8, 9, and 10. I feel like people are going to play Rampier because it loses a lot of consistency, but with searches from like older sets, so Star Sybil and whatnot. But even other decks will lose their searches and consistency, or flat out just lose out like 50% of their cards, like Wind Water and whatnot. So I think Rampier is still really good, and WAF will be really good. World of Final Fantasy. It would just be a different type of it, not as aggressive and not as combo feeling, but it'll be able to play other cards to fill in the space that the deck would have liked to play, rather than being like, I want to build World of Final Fantasy, I have only 5 or 8 slots when you're playing in standard. Now you have, let's say like 20 slots now, right, to put in what you think will be good. And then another deck would be like Mono Fire. I feel like it's really good.
Yeah, Mono Fire looks good, and I think that Rampier is still going to be decent, and WAF and everything. WAF's like turning more into a package. But I think what's kind of interesting is that North America is only going to play this Opus 8, 9, 10 L3 meta for Fanfare, which is so not a competitive tournament. There's no qualifications attached to that. And then the first actual tournament that matters that's going to use L3 in North America is going to be the Open, and that's going to be L3, 9, 10, 11. And we will see the first format in Paris at the Grand Open in Europe, but it almost feels kind of bad planning decks right now because you're thinking all these Opus 8 cards are going to be gone, and then you'll just have to, you don't even know how to build a deck because you just really can't predict what's going to be in the next set. So I feel like it feels just kind of wasteful when I try to build an L3 deck that it's not going to count for a tournament that I might go to.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, a really good example is like, if you want to play Final Fantasy 15, once we actually play it at a larger event, like you mentioned, so 9, 10, 11, all the 15 cards are gone. The relevant ones, anyways, because they're all from Opus 8.
Yeah, and so that's the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which is if you were going to build an L3 deck, which one would you build first? And my deck that I wanted to build was Mono Earth Splash Lightning, so you're using your Dougal to put in your Nero and like Fusoya and some other awesome lightning cards. But then it has the Road Trip Bros, and I'm doing the backup Noctis and to make a 2 CP Gladio forward, that combo. So that's not even going to be tournament legal by the time I go, if I were to go to an Open, which I'm strongly considering, because I mean top 4 goes to Nats is a decent prize. Like, it's better than go into an LQ. So yeah, like the main one of the main parts of the deck that I want to build won't even be legal at that tournament.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. The deck I'd probably build, it's probably either Wind Lightning. The list that I've been toying with has mostly actually Opus 9 cards. Like, you want to play like Fasoya, Yasmat, and whatnot. And then another deck was Ice Earth, but I feel like that list is going to lose a lot of cards because most of it is from Opus 8. So I have the same issue.
Yeah, and we really don't know. Well, you know what though, in Opus 11, we do know we're going to get new Final Fantasy 15 cards. So that might actually help me out, but not quite as much as having the combo that I want. But I mean, you know what? Like Ice Earth, I think it will continue to be okay. They always tend to get pretty good cards, so maybe you'll still have something to build once it's all said and done.
Yeah, the main hitter in Ice Earth is like Vayne from Opus 9, because card pool is smaller and people are going to want to play, I guess, more powerful cards when in effect. So I feel like there'll be less 2 CP backups, mainly like 4 CP that have like stronger effects and or like playing searches. So I think the taxing ability on Vayne would be really good because people won't be able to set up S-Pass in this smaller card pool.
Yeah, so they're going to need... so that's something that we didn't talk about either, is that like you're going to be setting up not as fast, but you're also going to be setting up in some elements. Like you're going to be playing a backup for the sake of it.
Yeah. The reason why I've been looking at Ice Earth is because a lot of the 2-drop Earth backups have relevant effects actually. So like, playing Lael and whatnot. And then for Ice, they have Lock as a really insane search, and then the Opus 10 search backups, the 3-drops that search for either Camelot, Eldnarsh, or the other one that searches for a monster. Those are really good. And to tie in the whole deck together, you have like Laguna, that not a backup, but a 4 that also continues searching. So I think Ice has a really good package currently. Just needs to be coupled up with another element that will complement it well.
Yeah, and I think that when I looked at the Earth backups, I was actually pretty happy with most of my backups. So I think the most powerful decks, do you think, will be dual colored then, rather than monocolored?
I believe so. Even though monocolor is more consistent, it just there's the cards are too, I guess, sporadic. They're like really far apart in power. So you could play a bunch of like heroes and legendaries, aside from ones that need to be played within its category or within its job. But then you need to fill in the other slots of what am I gonna play for my generic like 2-drops backups or whatever. Probably the best one, like I was mentioning earlier, I think Fire is gonna be really good because they have a lot of good 2 and 3-drop backups that you just play and you don't really care what's going on. You don't have to really interact with your opponent or interact with your own board. And I guess I missed one. Wind is pretty good too because they still have the Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles backup package. But for the event that you were mentioning, when Opus 8 leaves, we also lose the Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles package.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that like I think that where it's really going to test some people's deck building capabilities, like I'm really excited personally to see what you build because you're one of my favorite deck builders. So I feel like you're going to be putting out some really cool stuff, but for some players, it's really going to be challenging for them to string stuff together.
Yeah. At first, when I heard the news of L3, I was super excited, having a rotation format. But then after looking at all the cards, currently we have 412 cards within the three sets. Sounds like a large number to, I guess, average card game player, or just like thinking of like, oh, there's 412 cards. But honestly, this is like a super small pool.
Yeah.
And
But that's divided across a bunch of elements, right? Like that's
yeah.
It's not just
not much to do.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so one last thing I wanted to talk about, because we had talked about this in our chat before filming. You mentioned a little bit about set design, so, and that was in regards to like planning other formats as well. So do you have any comments on like set design and what that means for L3?
So there was a mishap with what happened with Opus 10. The set is nearly undraftable, in my opinion, because there's multiple cards that don't interact with the set itself. Mainly legendaries. You don't see them often, so you don't have to worry about it. But when you're drafting and you pull a bomb, so like your legend or your heroic, you want to feel like, this is gonna win me the game. Or like if I ever like draw this, I'm gonna win the game. But you draft Opus 10 and you're like, I have Refia that does nothing, or I have Lightning that does nothing. It kind of hurts, or like Folka. It's not just one or two cards; it's quite a bit. I feel like they should take time to design a set that it could draft well. If a set could draft well, L3 will perform the design of L3 would be really good, the format itself, because if the three individual sets are all designed well, then you always have an archetype to play, rather than just going to what you see first. Another issue, it has nothing really to do with card design, but it has to do with it has nothing really to do with card design, but it has to do with the game itself. When you design, when they design opuses, they tell you this opus has Final Fantasy 9 cards and then Final Fantasy 7 cards and whatnot. You already know those cards are going to work together on their own. So when they do that, but the next couple sets also have their own category and they're not the same category, now you have issues of I'm going to play this deck, but I only need the cards from one opus. So that's the issue we have currently with WAF and like Rampier in L3. Play all the Opus 10 cards for the most part.
Yeah, and that's actually going to, in a way, make the card pool even smaller, because you have to put the only synergy available into your deck, and then you only have a few slots left, and it's all from the same set. So if you do go tribal, if you do go category, then you're likely picking from just 1 to 2 sets, and not even the third set necessarily. But that's a really good point.
Yeah, and I find that that's a huge issue, but it's not that big, because if one set's really good, you get to play that for a while, especially if it's a new set coming out. So Opus 11 coming out, we already know that it has Final Fantasy 15 cards coming along with it. So maybe 15 deck in L3 would be really good, even with losing Opus 8. But it's hard to say with what's going on. And if they start printing more generic cards with generic effects, so I really enjoyed when they printed Opus 7. In my opinion, Opus 7 was one of the best sets to draft. They had all the summons were EXs, so every draft deck could have removal in one way or another. And in my opinion, all the bombs in that set were great to play. Shilinko wasn't that great, but it was still decent. And then Yuri being insane.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think that, they definitely have some goals to shoot for, like some sets that they did really well. And I hope that this means that L3 is going to become part of their bigger plan, and that it's, they observe it, and who knows, maybe a year from now we're talking about L5, and that's what it's called now. But until that point, I guess all we can do is give it an honest try. And you know what? I'm just personally really excited to play with some cards that I don't normally get to play with. That is always fun to me. I only wish it had happened earlier so that I could have made a Galuf deck in Earth.
Oh yeah, that would be insane. Are you speaking of the second print Galuf? Like the one that
pay two Earth, they have to block, he can't break during your turn. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you could have, I guess, played 4-color Warrior of Dawn if you wanted to.
Yeah, you could have. Okay, so I think that we're going to wrap it up there. So thank you so much for joining me, Yuda. It's a pleasure to have you on the Mysidia Post. Thank you for coming by.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Have a great day, everyone.
Oh. We'll have to do it again sometime. Okay, talk to you later.
Yep, bye.
All right, we're going to finish off today's program by talking a little bit about the first L3 event that we've seen this season. It was hosted in Omaha, Nebraska at Legendary Wolf Games, and they're actually going to be hosting the first Open for North America that will use L3 as the format. So we can see that they had, I think they had over 10 people out here, and the top 4 deck lists are posted. So in first place, we had Mono Fire, second place, Mono Water, third place, Rampier, and in fourth place, the store owner, Miles Tyler, was playing Final Fantasy VII Earth Wind. So it's pretty interesting to see some archetypes that we've seen all these archetypes in Constructed, except for maybe the last one, but we're going to take a look at how they look in our L3 format. So taking a look at the Mono Fire, it actually looks pretty good. You have a ton of removal with all these different Ifrits, Ifrita, and you've got Belias, which is pretty much similar to the Opus 2 version, and it's always been very good. The backup line is pretty insane in Mono Fire. You have your 1 CP backup in Geomancer, you've got a Searcher in Gosetsu, you've got lots of removal, Ace, Sid, and you've got even some bypass with Yotsuyu, summon recursion with Black Mage, and haste with Red Mage, and then a little bit of power boosts. So you've got like a full suite of resources on your backup line as well. And then when you go to the forward line, it's looking even better. We have Nail, which is just a terrific card. We have Gaius, and that's going to be another Searcher. Hien is going to make your guys too big for your opponents to possibly block. And we've got more consistency with Terra and Marsh that are EX bursts. They're going to recur summons and search cards. And this deck is just going to be super functional, and you're easily going to hit those 14 characters that you need to play in order to have Riditarian in as for his ability. So overall, this deck looks really sweet. And then if we look at the actual stamps on these, there's a decent amount of Opus 8 cards. So you're going to lose your Final Fantasy 14, part of your 14 package with Lee and Hien and Gosetsu rotating out when we go to the Omaha actual Open. And you're going to lose Black Mage and Red Mage and Yotsuyu as well. But we're going to probably get some pretty sweet Opus 11 fire cards to replace them. Looking at the Mono Water list, we've got a lot of interesting stuff here. So there's a bit of an FF9 package going on, as well as just like honestly a lot of really good staples. So Gilgamesh is a card that is seeing a little bit of play, but it's going to see a lot of play in L3. Ultros and Rosa are both really strong legendaries that just we haven't seen them in standard yet because Mono Water is such a tight list, but they're gonna be fantastic in this format. And that's kind of one of the exciting things about this format, is that we get to see these cards. Like you can see a board clear like Maydeen, where that's not going to see play in standard, but I mean it's actually pretty sweet in L3, so that's nice to clear. Like things like Astrologian, which people have openly said how much they like, but again, how are you going to fit it into constructed? And then you still have the good stuff like Porum, you still have Zidane, you have Ash, like all these fantastic cards, good summons. You still have your Leviathan, although that's going to rotate out. And then on the backup line, here's where we get a little bit weaker. Paladin's not a terrible card. It's going to bring back an Astrologian into your hand, and besides that, it will bring stuff like White Mage and actually just a bunch of White Mages. So it's kind of going to work like a minor in that regard, but overall, it's not that good. Like this White Mage can be quite good, but overall, like this backup line is just way less consistent. There's certainly like decent cards, but Gramps is solid. Luna Freya will take a bit to set up, but Luna Freya has some okay targets. I guess like Ico you might want to, and Nickel would be okay. Freya, like there's some okay targets for Luna Freya, but overall this deck is like it's very different from the Mono Water that we know and love. Okay, so Rampier is something that I think has been pretty highly anticipated. When we heard about L3, is it still going to be the same? And I mean, it looks pretty good. You've got a very similar backup line. You're losing things like Star Sibyl and Miner, so there's like a little less consistency. You have to have some removal in Prompto and Seek, but you're keeping that non-summon identity there. This is the wrong Hurdy. It's actually the 3 CP Hurdy, which is always going to hit, which is great. Although now without any Aluas to recur, do you really even need this Hurdy? Maybe we can go back into summons for L3 version of Rampier. And you've got some color fixing in your Moogle. Your monsters are all still really solid. It's all the same monsters. Looking at the forward lineup, it's looking pretty good. Some interesting things are the Scylla. We have to play more of those now. Things like Arden is sneaking in, Veritas, Vayne, these cards that you didn't have to, you wouldn't make, like they wouldn't make the cut necessarily. Vincent maybe not wouldn't make the cut, but now in this format we have to make some space, or we have some space to play these cards, and we're gonna. And then finally, looking at this Final Fantasy VII list, there's a lot of good stuff here. It's certainly going to be like this. Yuffie is just excellent, and I've actually really wanted to play this in Constructed. It gets seriously powerful. The Red 13 is kind of just meh. It's not bad, but it's not like that great either. And like same with the Cloud. Like there's a lot of cards here that are just probably a little under the mark. So this is like you have some good stuff, like Barrett's always going to be good, but overall this is kind of an interesting deck. It loses a lot when you can't play some of the earlier Final Fantasy VII stuff that makes Final Fantasy VII decks so good, like our 3CP light forward. But then if you look at the summons and the monsters, like these are all really, really strong summons and really strong monsters. And on the backup line, like I'm looking at these backups, and besides this color fixing Moogle and maybe this card right here, every single one of these backups is a solid backup. So like from kind of to the right, the summons and the backups for this deck actually look quite good, and I think Earthwind could maybe be an interesting L3 deck. The forwards, I don't know if it's worth it to run all these forwards for FF7 Synergy, but I mean, it's just like so cool that you get to try these new things to, like, just so that you can, like, you don't have all these cards that are like or they're must plays, like all these standard cards. It's like, oh well, you have to put a Y'shtola, 2 Y'shtolas, your Zidanes, your Aeriths, your Diabolos, and now you can't play these Alexanders, you can't play the Red 13, you can't play this Aerith because you're running all the mandatory wind cards. So I think that's like one of the coolest things about L3 is that we're going to get to play these cards that we just normally wouldn't get to, and we'll get to be competitive with them. Alright, thank you so much for watching the first episode of the FFTCG show. I hope that I can improve this format and kind of make a cool show for you guys going forward, and hopefully get some good guests and just provide some entertainment. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching. You can like and subscribe to support us further, and you can read the Mysidia Post articles at themysidiapost.com. You can also check out our Patreon if you want to support us more. And if you need FFTCG singles, then look no further than Cards That You Release. They've got great deals and prices. Check them out. Finally, I'd like to thank FFDecks for creating the best website for creating your Final Fantasy trading card game decks. They've also got a Patreon, so make sure you go check them out. They work so hard for the community, so let's pay them back. See you next time.